population is women. When you get down to the county jail level, you're looking at a much greater proportion. So historically, a system run by men for men has had a very easy time of saying, well, we don't need to worry so much about them because they're a smaller population, which is exponentially growing, but there's been so little attention to women in the criminal justice system. And I think, we're, in the work that I do at the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice, we're in 10 county jails where the average proportion of women in jails is more closer to 20 to 30%. So to think about the impact that's having on women and their lives and their families and their children is something we need to do a better job of as a state, as a nation, as people involved in the criminal justice system. So what I want to talk about is a lot of what we talk about with the exonerees is what happened to them in prison and what happens when they re-enter. But feminist scholars and feminist criminologists, which I'm not one specifically, but I work closely with them, is this pathways to offending for women, and thinking about how women dramatically differ from their male counterparts in the system, and thinking about their victimization histories, and then also thinking about childhood trauma that they face before they even come to the attention of a crime in the system. So when you were talking, I kept thinking about the cumulative trauma for the female exonerees, is that oftentimes women get into the system having experienced child abuse, sexual abuse, intimate partner violence in their adult relationships that go unaccounted for. And through the criminal conviction process, it's not recognized, and also through the cumulative trauma that they experience in a carceral setting is often not thought about from practitioners. So thinking about that cumulative trauma for the exonerees when they know they haven't done it and they're sitting in the system, and they may or may not have a history of abuse or trauma, but for those that do, what we've done to them in a carceral setting, especially for women who are very relational and often get isolated, is we just continually compound that trauma. And that's something that we are working on in the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice for women who have severe and persistent mental illness. This summer we're going to be looking at county jails. Oftentimes will tell us, oh, no one wants to work in the women's unit. That's the hardest unit to work in because they don't know how to handle the trauma, and they can't separate women in different units because there's generally just one unit for women. So what we're trying to do is help county jails rethink what they're doing for females in jail settings. And I'm hoping that as a state we can push the needle on this for women, whether they're innocent or not innocent. So this pathways to offending, I think, is something if someone's interested in the gender perspective to think about from a feminist criminology perspective. A couple other things that I want to talk about, not having done any work with exonerees, is we have done some surveys with women and men who are in Michigan's prison system who've been convicted of a sex crime. So my expertise is on sex offense policy, but we also, at one point, the Michigan Department of Corrections was interested in creating gender-specific programming for females convicted of sex crimes, which is a novel idea. It does not exist. And so what they wanted to know first was, how do women and men differ from each other who've been convicted of a sex crime? And a lot of what came out, as you might not be surprised by, is that they actually didn't differ in their childhood trauma, but what they did differ by is that they had higher rates of intimate partner violence victimization, and they had higher rates of having a co-offender involved in the crime, and they had higher rates, lower rates of sexual deviance scores. So what that really tells us, when we looked at qualitative data where we asked women to talk about the crime or anything they wanted to tell us about the involvement in the crime, is there was a stark difference in those codings where men often talked about sexual arousal, fondling, touching. They used more descriptive sexual type terms, open admission of doing the crime. And you flip that and you looked at the women's codes, and often there was more outright denial of the crime, that they didn't do it, or that they did it at the threat of their intimate partner who was their co-offender. So women's involvement in these types of crimes specifically often often comes at the behest of a violent partner. And so thinking about that as we process women in the system and think about their cumulative trauma, I think is really important. To not take up too much time, the one thing that I think is interesting and want to hear from your perspective is this issue of intersectionality. So when we saw the race panel, we saw mostly African American men being exonerated in the registry. But when you flip that and you look at the women, it's mostly white women. And I want to hear more about why are Black women not exonerated, or what are your thoughts behind why there are more white women as opposed to Black men? So I'll pass it over.
Thank you. I'm Michelle Jacobs. Thank you all for still being here, and thank you for allowing me to share the stage with so many phenomenal, passionate, and incredibly brilliant people. I come at this issue from a slightly different perspective. My awareness of wrongful convictions began when my brother was wrongfully convicted in 2008 in the state of Pennsylvania. So I'm here as a woman who's been directly and indirectly impacted by this issue, and as a woman who is a sister and a daughter of parents who have been seriously traumatized by this issue as well. But this experience compelled me to be also an advocate and an activist interested in trying to right the wrongs experienced by wrongfully convicted people. And it wasn't long after I moved to Detroit that I found Proving Innocence, or maybe they found me. I was actually doing research on my brother's case when I came across their website, and have been a board member since like 2011, I think. Maybe 2012, which, as Professor Zollman pointed out, I have been doing the social networking, although I'm trying to pass that particular bridge. In that role, I have actually, in just like doing the social networking stuff for Proving Innocence in terms of Facebook and Twitter, I have been contacted by so many people, reaching out, women in particular, seeking any help, right, for a loved one, a son, a brother, a spouse, a fiance, who has been wrongfully convicted. And I'm also a sociologist here at Wayne State, so when I looked at the issue, I was actually going to point out some of this intersectionality. So as a sociologist, I look at how individual lives are impacted by broader social structures like the criminal justice system. More specifically, I look at how the meanings that we as a society apply to differently raced and differently gendered people impact not only people's day-to-day lives as a result of how people interact with them, but also impact people's access to critical resources, and then following from that, their life chances as a result of how well they're served by societal institutions. So with that in mind, I just want to complicate the gendered approach a bit by pointing out some of the ways in which women's experiences of wrongful conviction and exoneration vary across race. And again, so all of this data, I love that it's been pointed out many, many times today. There's so much that we don't know, right, in this area. There are so many black holes. And so I'm drawing from the National Registry with the data that I have, but we know that that is very incomplete in terms of the number of people who have been wrongfully convicted, or the number of women who have been wrongfully convicted and or exonerated. So as Zieva pointed out, 213 women exonerees are in the National Registry. 65% of those are white, and 35% of those are women of color, and that's almost the reverse, the opposite direction of what's happening with men, right? They're about 65% black or men of color who have been exonerated versus 35% white men who have been exonerated, and that's really interesting, and I don't think anyone knows the answer to that yet. imbalance is that white women are overrepresented in the registry due to the child sexual abuse hysteria cases of the 1980s and 90s. And actually, I think it's about 25% of women in the National Registry were part of that. They were in there because of the hysteria, and in there for child sexual abuse. And almost all of those women, if not all of them, are white, because that's actually a crime that Black women are rarely, much less likely to be convicted of, I should say. So I think it's a really important issue that needs to be explored much more deeply. And just to give you like a couple of examples of how there are these differences between women who belong to different racial categories or identify differently racially. The most common crimes that women are wrongfully convicted of also vary across race. So whereas 50% of white women exonerees were convicted of crimes or presumed crimes, which is an important point, committed against children, intimate partners, or other family members in domestic or child care contexts, Black women were much less likely than white women to be convicted of crimes committed against a family member, and they were more likely to be convicted of crimes committed against a stranger. So 33% of Black women exonerees in the National Registry were convicted of street crimes like drug crimes or murder, while slightly fewer, 30%, were convicted of domestic crimes. And in instances where no crime occurred, which is a really important distinction between men exonerees and women exonerees, because I'm not sure if you knew the exact statistic, but 64% of the women exonerees in the National Registry were exonerated of a crime that never occurred. So when this was true, when no crime occurred, white women were convicted for victimizing an intimate partner or adult family member, were more likely to be convicted of that, whereas Black women were more likely to be convicted of drug crimes. When it comes to factors contributing to wrongful convictions, for both Black and white women in the registry, perjury and official misconduct were the most common factors. But one important factor varied across race, and that's mistaken witness identification. And that is also true for Black men, but not so much for white men or white women. There was one woman in the registry who had, where that was a factor. And so, I guess my final take-home points are just that gendered stereotypes in terms of the nurturing caregiver roles that we assign to women and the expectations that we place upon them as a result of this image or this idealized image of what a woman should be. There are not only these gendered stereotypes, but also racialized biases that play fundamental roles in creating the crime and suspect typifications that take hold and that shape the behaviors and the practices of actors within the criminal justice system. So cultural assumptions about gender and race both play a role in facilitating the tunnel vision that hinders the ability of law enforcement to analyze the crime differently, to look at it from a different angle. And these cultural assumptions, which I like to refer to, I prefer the language of controlling images over stereotypes, because when you say stereotype, by definition, a stereotype is something that's not true, it's an exaggeration of reality, right? And so people dismiss it as something that doesn't have a real impact on people's lives, right? So a controlling image, on the other hand, when we can't even escape, right? These images of certain people who belong to certain categories. And these images are perpetuated in all of our social institutions, in our families, in our religious institutions, our educational institutions, right? Our government, every social institution, these images are perpetuated within. Then these images actually exert control over how people think about and act toward other people, right? So controlling images make false narratives of crime seem as though they are credible, resulting in the wrongful convictions of both men and women, but in the case of women, oftentimes for accidental or natural deaths. As Zieva pointed out, crimes committed by other people in efforts to protect themselves or their loved ones from harm. Zieva talked a little bit about how women are differently impacted than men by societal expectations due to these expectations of the caregiver and the nurturer role, which translates into harsher views of women who don't conform adequately, which then also in turn results in more difficult transitions into full personhood again for women exonerees once they finally can come back into the community. And so I just want to also leave you with the idea that Black women are not only subjected to these controlling images, but in addition, they also have false narratives about Black folks as poor, Black folks as always Black folks who live in disadvantaged communities, Black folks who live in crime-ridden communities, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you for looking at the data even more deeply and from a racial perspective.
Well, it was easy because I didn't interview 21 people.
Questions?
Did anyone have a question, comment?
I want to ask, have any of y'all been into women's prisons? I get updates all the time from an individual who keeps me up on what's going on. And they are suffering, measles outbreaks, flu outbreaks, and they suffer a whole bunch of stuff that some of the male prisoners or prisoners don't have to. And just because it's just one prison, it's hard to separate them. And they suffer from overcrowding and all of that. So what are y'all doing? Is there anything y'all doing to combat those type of issues?
So it's been a while since I've been in a women's prison, but I'm an inside out instructor. For anyone who doesn't know that, it's faculty who get trained to teach college classes in the prisons. And so you bring 15 students from your academic institution and 15 inside students, and you deliver a course. So we have colleagues from Eastern Michigan who teach inside out courses in the women's prison, and they had considerable challenges over the last year getting into the prison because they were on lockdown for health-related issues. So I've heard about it, but I haven't been in lately. When I've been in the women's prison, it's mostly been in the R-side unit, which is the treatment unit, because I'm a social worker, and so we pull case files to get data, mostly for this comparative study of women convicted of sex crimes compared to men. So we went both into Cooper Street and into the women's prison to look at these cases. And it is a unique situation in that you have only one women's prison in the state. You have multiple lawsuits against that prison for allegations of rape by corrections officers. There's been a lot of issues. And again, it's just like at the jail level where they seem to throw their hands up. Like, well, what can we do? We just don't put enough emphasis on their risks and needs that they just kind of get brushed under the rug until a lawsuit kind of rears its head. No, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a legal scholar, so I don't know what's coming from that angle, but most often that's the road that is taken to kind of call these injustices into question.
I'm not sure if I can see everything, but my question was about women pleading guilty and if you have any statistics on that. And I know from experience, a lot of times women that are pleading guilty of crimes they did not commit cases because of what we talked about earlier, which is basically, if I don't plead guilty, I'm going to sit in this jail all weekend, my kids are going to go to the system, but I don't have someone to watch them, I'm going to lose my job, so I might as well just say I committed the retail fraud, plead guilty, get to go home, do community service, right? So, but at a bigger level, right, we do have women that are pleading guilty to crimes they did not commit, and do you know if there's